So, Neil, I'm glad that you decided to join us for the summit because I think you talk about a topic that most people maybe don't focus enough attention on, which is how do you capture someone's attention in the first few seconds of your writing, your video, your speech? What's that hook that pulls them in to the bigger story? And I wanted to bring you on to talk about that because that's something that I feel that you've mastered. You've been in Entrepreneur Magazine talking about it. You've been in a lot of different publications on this topic. You even wrote a book that's coming out in January on the topic. So,
Thank you for the plug, Ron.
yeah, I mean, this is why we're here. I mean, this this interview is the plug. I got the man who's the most interesting 2 minutes of everybody's story. You figured out how to solve that. So, can you give us a little bit of background about you and what you've done up until this point?
My background, because ultimately, Ron, I consider myself a persuasion expert. It just so happens that persuasion is an incredibly valuable tool from the stage. And I found that it's a really clear path to the way I can help people by putting myself out there as a public speaking expert. And what I found is that there are a lot of really solvable problems that happen on stage. But before I was helping with that, and before I considered myself a persuasion expert, I actually had a background in book publishing, where I worked as a low-level editor at Penguin, where I work with New York Times bestselling authors. And I noticed certain patterns in the most effective content, and I noticed a lot of collaborators, people being paid by authors to write books for them and stuff, and they were still doing a very poor job. And so after only a few years of working at Penguin, I wound up leaving and setting out to write more. And within a year of that, I had my first client working on a book proposal to pitch to the major publishers. And we got a 6-figure deal with HarperCollins. And I did a lot of work with that client and helped other clients with their books, helping them to write it or writing it for them or whatever it might have been. And all through that, I came to realize that there were certain patterns, both on the page and on the stage, that thought leaders, entrepreneurs, experts could all utilize and stand out in a truly powerful and meaningful way, like a night and day difference between what they do and what everyone else does.
Can you give us a contrasting example of what the average person does and what someone who's following your system does?
At a high level, I mean, I'll want us to, of course, talk about hooks and the opening like we're promising everyone. But at a high level, my work centers a great deal on saving speakers from what we can call the show up and throw up. What most speakers do when they go out on stage is that they have some kind of introduction. They then provide 3 or 5 or 7 or sometimes even 9 concepts or steps or tips or whatever it is, and then they have some kind of conclusion. And this is actively advised. My girlfriend was taking a course not related to public speaking, but they had a little business module. She was learning about working with animals, and here's how you have a business around it, and they suggested public speaking, and they advised to do just that, just to have an introduction, a few points, and then a conclusion, which is what we were taught to write in essays in 4th grade. It's just a terrible way to get content across because you're just dumping information into their minds. But this is the information age, and we don't need more information. We need to believe that change is possible. That's what a speaker can do, that just reading a bunch of content on the internet or reading a bunch of stuff that ChatGPT spits out. What a speaker can do is compel people like the audience to believe that change is possible. And so why not create a talk where by the end people are completely empowered to move forward with that? What that usually leads to is higher speaking fees, more speaking gigs, and people raising their hand and saying, yes, I want to be a client, or yes, I want to buy your program, or whatever it is. And so instead of slamming them with all this information, I have my clients build strategically up to a single light bulb moment, like an epiphanous moment, where people are like, oh, I get it now. And that empowers them in a meaningful way. You provide still some action items to support that big idea, but the larger point isn't all of your stuff, all the content. It's that belief, that empowerment. Yes, I can do this, and I want to move forward with it.
Gotcha. So this aha moment, what are the components of that?
It's what I call a silver bullet. When we look over the course of the last 2,500 years, there's been this one persuasion technique that's been hiding in plain sight. And we saw it with Socrates, and we saw it with Sun Tzu and many other ancient thinkers. Sun Tzu says on line 18 in the first chapter of The Art of War, he says, all of warfare is based on deception. And Socrates, as written by Plato, Socrates said, all of philosophy begins in wonder. And then as we go through time, we see one person after another using this silver bullet technique, which includes Ed Catmull, who wrote the New York Times bestselling book Creativity Inc. He's the co-founder of Pixar. And a quarter of the way into the book, he says, getting the team right is the necessary precursor to getting the ideas right. And then we have famous TED speakers like Simon Sinek, who says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Or we have Dan Pink, who says, the secret to high performance is not rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive to do things because they matter. And I could give examples for our entire session here, but the point is that it's this one cause and effect sentence. When you take one action, like deceiving your opponent, you get one outcome, like winning at war. Action leads to outcome. And because it tells you what to do, and it tells you why you need to do it, and it doesn't give you a whole bunch of other noise and stuff in the process, it just distills it all down. People are like, oh, I get it now. And it might seem like it's a little too good to be true, but it absolutely happens to be true.
Gotcha. Okay. So are you saying that someone who, no matter what we teach, we have to get it down to one sentence or one concept, which I have to understand. Go a little deeper.
When, let's say, with one of my clients a number of years ago, I used to volunteer at a children's hospital when I lived in Los Angeles, and she had to give these little 10-minute presentations on, like, she was the head of the program. She became my client because I was already a volunteer, and she said, hey, could you help me with this? And I helped her to find her sentence, to find her silver bullet. And then a couple of weeks later, she happened to have a 10-minute presentation, and she dreaded it because whenever she gave presentations, people just glazed over like, oh, God, another story about children in the hospital kind of thing. More statistics, more numbers. And at the end, they would usually just politely clap. And so I found out from someone else actually that day that she was stressing about this presentation. So I was like, oh, I could help with that. So I told her, as I said, hey, would you like some help figuring out what to say today? She said yes. So we worked out what it was she was going to say. And this time, rather than just glazing over and politely clapping at the end, they were held rapt at attention. And instead of just politely clapping, they rushed up to her with business cards at the end, and one of them even invited her to apply for a grant. And this was just in a 10-minute presentation. What she actually did was draw them in, hook them at the very beginning with a story, and then talked about the ways we typically try to heal children. Now, her program was about gifting books to children staying in the hospital, and there's a therapeutic reading library to help children to overcome issues and struggles related to their illness. And there was also a bedside reading program that I did. I would go around and read with all these funny and silly voices and stuff for the kids and all of that. It was a cool program. Instead of just describing it all at once like most people do, the show up and throw up, she tells a story at the beginning about this boy who was struggling, and he was toward the end of his life, and the transformation that happened in the room because she took a book to him and read. And then she talks about all of these assumptions that we can only heal children with medicine and with surgery and maybe with lifestyle and all that, but that there's this untapped potential. And she tells them about the program and whatnot, and then she says her silver bullet, which in this case happens to be just 3 words. Literacy can heal. And then she explained a couple of practical components to the program, and then thanked them and said, if you want to know more, please come talk to me, or whatever it was she said at the end as a call to action. And she gets rushed afterwards because not only was she compelling from the beginning because she hooked them at the beginning, but with that silver bullet, she led up to this epiphanous moment where even if someone wasn't interested in the program, they could hear those 3 words, literacy can heal, and they could start forming their own ideas about what they could start doing. If one of them had a kid who was hyperactive and would never settle down to go to sleep, they could think, literacy. I could start reading to my child at night, and maybe I could start gradually reading gentler and softer and more toned down books. They could just start forming ideas just from her saying those 3 words. And that's the empowerment we were talking about earlier. We were just talking about this, oh, I get it now. Literacy can heal. And because of that dopamine hit, because of the chills they get, because of that sudden surge of possibility, then they rush up with business cards. And that's how it works.
No, that's incredible. I'm sitting there thinking, like, how can I use this?
Of course.
Like, how can I use this to inspire more speakers? And because we played around with a lot of different one-liners and taglines with Speaker Hub, and I'm like, oh, so okay, because I want to get some coaching now, right? So, are there certain components of a silver bullet or one silver idea? Is there certain components of it that needs to be included in order to make it interesting or more impactful?
What I like to say, Ronnie, it's a good question. What I like to say is that you're going to be much more successful at creating the conditions for a powerful silver bullet if you're somehow diverging from the common and typical way that people try to solve a problem. And so I like to think of Moneyball, the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. And at the beginning of the movie, Jonah is explaining the concept to Brad, and he says there is an epidemic failure within the game to understand what is really happening. He goes on to say that your goal shouldn't be to buy players. Your goal should be to buy wins. And in order to buy wins, you need to buy runs. And so he says, in so many words, the key to winning at baseball is not to buy players, but rather to buy runs. And I love this example, Ron, because it really clearly and cleanly demonstrates a divergence in thinking. Everyone in the old school way of playing baseball is trying to just buy players. They're all just trying to go out there and find the person and try to get them for the best price they can. And so these Moneyball guys come along and say, the point isn't to buy players. The point is to increase the likelihood that someone's going to get on base and that they're going to run the bases and get across the plate. That's going to be the key to winning, because runs are what wins you a baseball game. It's not players. And so this is a great example of divergent thinking. And it also, in making this actionable for our viewers, it also lends itself to a really clear and clean, a comparably clear and clean exercise to do to find your silver bullet. You could do what I call the epidemic failure exercise, named after the Moneyball scene, where you could say the epidemic failure in how people, some kind of person, tries to solve some sort of problem or achieve some sort of goal is that they blank, the false, flawed solution. But the real way to do it is to blank. And so I'll go through it again just so that because that could have been a little hard to follow. The epidemic failure in how most baseball management or baseball leadership try to win games is that they buy players. But the real way to win at games is to buy runs. And so if you do that contrast, that's going to help give you clarity. Contrast creates clarity.
So the initial statement is the commonly held belief, right? Like the current commonly held belief. And So that's what I start off with. And then on the backside, I bring in the epiphany that I've had by
Right.
looking at the data or looking at
Mm-hmm.
things of that sort. Would that be true?
Exactly. Yeah, data is going to really help support you. Anecdotal demonstration of effectiveness is going to support you. I'm a huge fan of client case studies or journalistic storytelling or whatever it is, or even personal story as a way to demonstrate something happening. And then you back it up with some data, with statistics, with whatever it is. Anything that's going to both make it emotionally compelling and intellectually justified. So the two are woven together as in a singular flow. And you do that, and it's going to actually provide a really powerful case so that by the time you get to the silver bullet, they've practically already answered the question for you in their minds. But when you say it, it all comes together, and that gives them the empowerment.
Okay. I'm going to try this right now. Right? So
Okay.
when we brought Speaker Hub, because Speaker
Yeah.
Hub was a directory for speakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the commonly held belief was that if you put yourself in a directory, event organizers would make it would be easier for event organizers to find you, to book your gigs, right? So that would be the commonly held belief by 61,000 users in Speaker Hub, right?
Right.
They're on other platforms. The epiphany for me would be based on booking 300 speakers, I found that the ones who get booked the most are constantly reaching out to people every day. They're not just sitting in the directory waiting.
Right.
They're doing proactive outreach. Is
Right.
that kind of like the two contrasting things? I'm just trying to apply it because I'm trying to think. So
Of course, yeah.
Like, okay, I see how this applies.
For your content and like for what you just said about Speaker Hub, I would even think that if we were creating a 45-minute talk, like a keynote that you might give, I would even talk about the proactive instead of reactive or responsive or however we contrast that. I would talk about that maybe a quarter or a third of the way in, as in, here's the commonly held belief is that you put yourself in a directory and then someone will just find you. That being responsive or reactive to demand is the key to this. But it's actually about being proactive based on, and you can share anecdote and all of that. The reason why I say you might put that toward the beginning is because then the person will be thinking, yeah, because remember, this is about convincing people that change is possible. That's the thing. And they might think, yeah, I absolutely should be pitching more. I should do that. But that just seems like it's an overwhelming amount of work. And so then you gradually make the case that the key to being proactive at finding speaking gigs is not muscling your way through one pitch after another, but rather relying on a machine to find the opportunities and to create the pitching for you. The more you automate the process of pitching, the more sustainable your proactive outreach will be. Something like that.
No, that's it. And I got this recorded, bro.
You got this recorded, man. But that's, you see how like you might set up the problem early on, like how do you become more proactive without burning yourself out? And then you make the case gradually, and then you hit them with that big idea. And it's like the more you rely on the automation of the pitching, the more sustainable your efforts will be.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're also thinking of the objections that are going to come
right.
Like, because any new idea, we fight it. And I'll give you a great example. I was interviewing someone else, and I have this personal belief that the way you get speaking gigs is by reaching out, right? It's a combination of reaching out and being available, being findable. Mm-hmm. And I would say no one's ever gotten a speaking gig from running Facebook ads. Mm-hmm. But I interviewed a guy on the summit for the same summit, and he says, yeah, one of the best things I do to get speaking gigs is Facebook ads. And I was like, wait a minute, like, how, right? I mean, we didn't have time to go into it, but it was one of those contrary to popular belief things that stood out, and I wish I would have had the time to dig into it a little bit more. But I mean, that was because I'm like, I've been doing this for a while, and I've never seen anyone saying that they got speaking gigs from running Facebook ads. So that became a bit more intriguing for me, and it was contrary. It definitely was, perpendicular to what I was talking about and what I believe. So I should have gotten the justification, but I see how that will make something stand out. Next time I'm going to ask him to defend it. So yeah, give me the data behind that. How are you doing it? So forth and so on. But I get what you're saying. It's really interesting to have that perpendicular thought, something that goes against, not parallel going around, but it's going against what's already being stated.
It becomes a very powerful way to inspire people to try something different, which is ultimately what people want. They want the change. They're doing something different. If put it this way, if everything was working fine, they probably wouldn't be seeing a speaker, because most people are at an event to see a speaker because of some transformation they're seeking. And so if you're going to inspire people to create change in their life, then in theory it's going to be with something they hadn't done in the past.
Now, yeah, man, dude, I, so many beds are good off. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
like, it's the reason why they're called thought leaders, right? Because if you just say what's commonly stated, you just have an alarm clock. You're just a reminder. Like, you're not really leading the cause. But the thought leader has these contrary beliefs. I grew up in St. Louis, and there's a bridge in St. Louis called the Eads Bridge, and it's named after a guy whose last name was Eads, but it's upside down. And traditionally, back in the 1800s, this bridge was built in the late 1800s. Bridges were built up this way, right? Like the supports were up at the top, like the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever. The Eads Bridge has no vertical supports above the roadway. It's all this way. They're all down this way. And they didn't believe that it would work. But they couldn't build supports at the time large enough to cross the Mississippi River. So they had to go down. And will probably try to put an illustration, or if you're at your computer, Google the Eads Bridge and look at it compared to any other bridge. And it was the first upside down non-suspension bridge. But it still uses pressure in the arch at the bottom in order to support it. And that contrary thinking, right? Now it changed a lot because nobody was thinking that way. And he was using parabolas. The supports are in a parabola form, which supports the weight. And it's very, very, very interesting. When you think about that contrary thought is, it can scare people, but if you have the data to back it up, you become a thought leader. You become a game changer in your industry. So should someone bring this up at the beginning? Should they open their speech with this silver bullet aha moment? Because I think it would be a mistake to save it.
I strongly encourage people to delay the silver bullet until it serves, so it can serve as a climactic moment of realization for the audience. Now, that could seem risky, or it could seem like, well, shouldn't you be giving your best stuff at the beginning so that people know to stay tuned? And I don't recommend starting off with the essence of your talk. This actually winds up sounding more like what most people do when they say, here's my introduction and here are my three pieces and then here's my conclusion kind of thing. So if we're not going to do that, what should we do instead? I have worked with a lot of speakers over the years, and what I came to really see as a consistent driver of their success was in deliberately creating tension at the beginning, in the very opening of the talk, so that when you have, like, let's say you're a person who works with clients as a coach or something like that, and you figured out your silver bullet and you want to just yell it from the rooftops kind of thing. Instead, you could tell the story of a client who is really struggling with a painful situation. And then you jump ahead to the amazing transformation that they had. 6 months later, this amazing thing had happened. This had taken place. And without saying how they got there at the beginning, you say, so in 6 months, they were able to go from this to that. How on earth was that possible? Well, during our time together, I'm going to show you exactly the one insight that made all of this possible. And so you've created a tremendous amount of dramatic tension because you revealed the bad and that the before and then the after, the bad and then the good, but you haven't revealed how that happened. And so something very powerful then takes place. They wonder how it happened. And that sense of wonder is the thing that Hollywood, with all of its blockbuster movies and all of its multi-season shows and all of that, what they've all figured out is that the single most important thing to drive viewership is anticipation. And yet here come speakers who just throw all their stuff at their people without any kind of rhyme or reason, and then just say more and more and more and more stuff, and there's no need to anticipate anything because it's just being all hurled at them at full speed. But if you create that dramatic tension, you just say, if you create a mystery, if you create a puzzle that needs to be solved, they're going to lean in and they're going to wonder, how did this happen? All right, he's got me. I got to know what he's talking about. I got to know what she's talking about. Anticipation drives engagement. And this is the thing that so many speakers overlook because they're so busy hammering their audience with information. But if you create those kind of circumstances, they'll lean in and they'll put away their phones and they'll be rapt at attention until you reveal that silver bullet as the climax, as the reason why, as the cause of that transformation.
No, it makes sense. So storytelling is really important. There's an old saying that says more is caught than taught, and I think when someone tells a story that has messages embedded, you get to catch the part that's for you, versus where a lecturer is giving you the points like a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. You're getting more of a lecture, you're being taught, and there's no practical application to the teaching. Where in the story, you can imagine yourself being that hero or villain or whatever you want to be, or even the guru or the guide in that story. I can see how that works. How does someone become a better storyteller?
When I was in 4th grade, I was in a production of The Jungle Book based on the Disney cartoon, and I played King Louie the orangutan. And so that meant I had a big song and dance number, I Want to Be Like You. And I just was a huge ham as a child, and I just threw my legs every which way and my arms every which way. Well, I didn't wear my costume until the first performance in front of half the school. And I had these big furry gorilla slippers as part of it. And so I started kicking my legs every which way during my dance number, and my left slipper fell off my foot and landed unceremoniously in the pit between the stage and the audience. And in that moment, I had the equivalent of like an oh crap kind of, a 4th grade equivalent of an oh crap moment. And something, Ron, possessed me to just hurl, like take my right foot, which still had the slipper, hurl it back, and then kick it forward with as much might as I could. And the other slipper went flying across the auditorium and landed somewhere in the middle of the audience. And everyone went berserk. And the reaction was so powerful that I deliberately kicked my slippers off every performance thereafter. And I realized that sometimes the greatest catastrophes are the greatest opportunity for success. That was a story that is a true story about my life, like a speaker might tell about theirs or might tell about someone else. And within that was the ingredient that made it worth telling. Okay? And when I ask people this, they may have some good guesses, but rarely do they actually figure out that the thing that it had that made it worth telling was the moment that the left slipper fell off. Because the catastrophe, as I described it later on in the story, was a moment of the unexpected. It was a moment that I didn't see coming. And why is that so centrally important? Because what did I do a moment later? I kicked the other slipper off, and then I deliberately built that into the choreography for every performance thereafter. The unexpected moment forced me to adapt. And that adaptation is what gave the lesson, the insight. All of those lessons, morals of the story in Aesop's fables, like the tortoise and the hare, slow and steady wins the race. The insight comes from the unexpected thing that the tortoise defeats the hare. So the question originally was, how do we become better storytellers? And fundamentally, I recommend people start with the moment of the unexpected, because somewhere in that divergence from what was supposed to happen comes the gold that your audience is really going to benefit from.
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
So should they open with that? Is that what they should open with? Because we're talking about how to be interesting in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I get to go the silver bullet. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
Netflix did it. What was that one? It was like a political show. Mm-hmm. And everybody watched it on Netflix. And then the guy had some goofy scandal and it messed up the whole show.
Oh, House of Cards.
House of Cards. Like, they were the best at making you laugh. You're like, I want to see. Right? And so I get the cliffhanger value.
Yeah.
The value of being a better storyteller and finding the unexpected lesson in the stories that we tell.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the hook at the beginning? Where are we in the story now? In our story?
With the unexpected, when you're telling a client's transformation story, for example, the unexpectedness is in the transformation itself.
Gotcha. But I'm saying, if I see my silver bullet for the middle, and I open with an interesting, am I opening with the story, or is there something before that?
So one of the things, Ron, that's a very important tip for people to know. I had one client who she would start her talks like almost every speaker does, which is go out and they're all clapping. Oh, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. Oh, that's so kind of you. And then they start giving their talk. And this squanders the highest point of tension in the talk, because people come out there and they're clapping and nothing has happened yet. It's like the start of a race where before the gun goes off, there's that tension, and then everything gets set in motion after the gun goes off. And so there might be some tension if there's a close photo finish at the end or whatever. But the point is that there's that tension at the beginning. Anything can happen. Same thing happens at the beginning of a speech. But what most speakers, by visiting and saying, oh, thank you so much, they're squandering that tension. And so what I recommend, if we know that we're going to tell a client transformation story, what I recommend is, and of course there are lots of ways to open, and lots of opening stories or non-stories that are also emotionally compelling, but just using the example we've been working on tonight, what we find is that instead of going out and saying, oh, thank you so much, you might go out, maybe look at the audience for a moment just to acknowledge that you see them and they see you. And then you start with a single opening line that puts them right in the story. Like, I looked down at my credit card bill and I was at a loss for how I was going to pay even the minimum payment. That's like an opening line. You put them right in the story, and it's like, all right, clearly this is a story of financial struggle. And then you say, but within 6 months, not only had I paid off all of my debt, but I had $150,000 in the bank. And it was all because of one idea. And that's the reason we're here today, is for me to share what that idea is. Something like that. So you start with an opening line without squandering it at all. I mean, it's going to be tense. You're going to feel weird about it. But that's why you're harnessing the energy. You're not squandering it. You're not dissipating it.
You made me think of like the movies.
Yeah.
Where the guy is laying on the ground.
Yeah.
And the narrator says, I bet you wonder how I got here.
Yeah, exactly. You're right in the middle of the action. Think of Iron Man, and he's just in the Humvee with the soldiers, and then he gets attacked and gets hit with shrapnel, and it fades to black, and then it goes 36 hours into the past to get them up to that kind of thing, and you just put them in the middle of the action. I mean, Iron Man launched a multi-billion-dollar movie franchise. So why don't we take some cues from that in our speaking? But speakers don't do that. They have this thing, they've been just seen too many terrible teachers at school do a terrible job lecturing, so they emulate that, and they think that their audience is a bunch of robots who can consume as much content or information as they throw at them. But we need to treat our audience like humans. We need to treat them the way filmmakers and TV producers treat them. And then they'll stay with us, and they will be rapt at attention, and they will want to connect afterwards.
No, this is good, man. I mean, I'm about to change some stuff. My presentation skills about to go through the roof because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, what can I do? Like, nobody really knows me anyway. So when I go to a speaking thing, it's not like they're going to give me a standing ovation. So it's almost better, and I'm just imagining, and you can give me some feedback. It's like, I shouldn't even say anything. I should just have on a lapel mic and just walk out on stage and stand there until everybody shuts up.
So he's not saying anything. Oh,
like, yeah, you know what I mean? They sit down probably. You like, hi, I'm Ron Story, and get into whatever. What are you doing? Not even do it. Just open it with the one-liner. I looked up such and such, and this happened. Yeah, dude, that would be like I could imagine the drama, but I'm gonna practice it in the daycare.
That's right.
I'm practicing about kids.
Well, you can get them to pay attention, and you're set.
Yeah. But they don't know how to build either, so that makes it even easier.
Yeah, of course. Well,
no, this is good, bro. This is what are we missing? What part of it did we miss?
Well, there's another, like, after you give your silver bullet, I recommend that you provide a few action steps. People think I'm against putting any information in the talk, but it's not that I'm against it. It's just the silver bullet sets up the larger umbrella concept, and then you give them a few steps. I typically recommend 3 things, 3 teachable items. Event planners think that they'll say, just give them a bunch of tips and that'll be great. And that's what all people want, is just a bunch of tips. They don't want tips. They want change. And people think that tips are the way to go because they're bite-sized, which makes them actionable, which means that people believe that they can do it. I imagine people watching this can see themselves giving that opening line. They're maybe not sure about some of the other stuff I said, but they definitely could see themselves doing that opening line because tips are bite-sized. People believe that a bite-sized piece of information is more actionable. But that's not the reason why tips are of value. It's because people need to believe that change is possible before they do something. And instead of giving just tips your entire talk, you give them the big idea, this big thing that empowers them, and then either tips or a few steps or whatever it is. You can give them you give them things that they can start trying on their own, even if they never see you again, because there is still a need for practical value there. With that, you provide the practical content, and then I like to have my clients end with another self-contained story, a way to say this here, like a self-contained story about another person who had a transformation from that silver bullet idea. And you do that, and that just gives you this little boost of possibility at the end, and then a call to action of some kind. If you'd like to download my freebie, or if you'd like to talk, then scan this QR code or fill out my talk a dot thing or whatever it is.
No, this has been good, man. This has been really good. Like, it's practical. It's like you don't think about it, but you think about the movies, you see it all the time.
All the time.
Movies, and no, I understand. I get the idea now, because I wasn't very good at that part. I'm trying to, like, I just want to get to the point with my stuff, and I need to probably build that tension. I wasn't a good tension builder. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so, no, I get it.
Tension is a little tougher on the nervous system, so it's not something that you necessarily just naturally fall into. A lot of us are tension averse. We don't want tension. But if there's payoff, like I talked about in the power of anticipation, if you have a silver bullet, then it's really worthy of anticipation. If you try to build anticipation around 5 steps, it's going to be like, oh, well, I got a lot of work to do. That's not anticipating anything. That's dreading it. But if you have one thing that makes the difference, which is what the silver bullet represents, then they're like, oh, really, just one thing? And they anticipate it. And that tension really pays off if you deliver the goods.
No, I get it. Okay, all right. Quick question: are you an introvert or extrovert?
Oh, that's a tricky one, man. Anything to do with Myers-Briggs, and I'm wary just because the binary proposition is a little weird, but I have a lot of qualities that represent both. When I tested for Myers-Briggs, it said I was about 65% extrovert. It surprised me because I have so many traits that are like an introvert, so I don't really know. Everyone probably says, I don't know, an ambivert, but it honestly feels kind of true in this case.
What's an ambivert?
Well, it's like being ambidextrous. You have your right and your left hand both working. And if you're an ambivert, you have the qualities of both all wrapped into one neat little package. And by neat little package, I mean a very messy human package.
All right, cool, man. Anything else you want to leave people with before we close out?
Well, if it's not inappropriate, I'd love to share 104 opening lines to possibly start your speech with if people are interested. And they could just go to nielcanhelp.com/104, and then you could get it. And you could try all these different opening lines and see which one fits best for your talk.
Yeah, well, if you send me the PDF version, we'll put that as a handout so they can just get it.
Beautiful.
That'll be great.
All right.
Anything else?
I really hope that people remember that the value of their speech isn't based on what they say on stage. It's what their audience does once they're done saying it. And that's my silver bullet.
I'll leave it at that. We'll drop the mic on that one, man. Thanks again.